will be here for as long as we can hold the picket.
They are here on the picket line to stay, so please come and join them outside Prime Minister Albanese's office.
The time for senators and members of parliament to continue to attend and inflame tension outside these offices must end.
For months now, protests about what has been happening in Gaza have been underway on university campuses and on the streets of our cities. They have particularly targeted politicians' offices. But now all the bitterness has erupted inside Parliament House.
This Prime Minister is so desperate to detract and distract from Labor's complicity and backing of the invasion that is taking place at the moment. They will come in here and make spurious allegations.
Labor has refused repeatedly to call for a permanent ceasefire. What they've called for is a humanitarian ceasefire so that there's a pause so that people can be fed and then the bombing can start again.
To be telling people when there is a government calling for ceasefire that somehow it is calling for conflict is deliberate misinformation. And I don't see why misinformation coming from the left is somehow noble when misinformation coming from the right is so wrong.
About the only unity we have seen between the major political parties in recent times emerged yesterday, as they both turned their ire on what they said were attempts by the Greens to exploit the conflict.
Our social cohesion is a national asset. Right now, our communities are distressed. People, particularly with relatives, either in Israel or the occupied territories, are distressed. It is unacceptable that misinformation is being consciously and deliberately spread by some Green senators and MPs. There is no place for anti-Semitism, prejudice of any sort, Islamophobia, in our communities.
What the Prime Minister does today in condemning the actions of those who seek for their own political purposes and their own political advancement to pour fuel on this fire deserve condemnation of this chamber. And they should, from day one.
This morning, things became even more tense after Greens leader Adam Bandt said he was taking legal advice over comments made by the Attorney-General in a television interview yesterday afternoon. It has been a bitter and unhappy fortnight of parliamentary sittings, reflecting and increasingly dominated by the growing local community fracturing over Gaza. These fractures have come on top of equally bitter claims and counterclaims about the management of our immigration system. There have also been the usual gotchas coming out of Senate estimates hearings and a reminder that out in the real world, things are getting ever darker in the economy with the release of the latest national accounts yesterday. But it is the question of a rising tide of anti-Semitism, which has particularly exercised the coalition, which has been dominating the parliamentary discussion about community cohesion.
Can I say, as a Jewish Australian, I am so sick and tired of this government, the Human Rights Commission, universities and other bodies in Australia being unable to say anti-Semitism without saying Islamophobia in the same breath.
Liberal MP Julian Leeser wants the government to establish a commission of inquiry into anti-Semitism at Australian universities.
To fail to singularly identify and call out the particularity of anti-Semitism, and indeed the largest increase in anti-Semitism in our history, in and of itself is anti-Semitic. And it creates some sort of dangerous narrative for our social harmony that suggests a Jewish-Muslim conflict here in Australia, when so much of the anti-Semitism is actually propagated by the militant socialist left.
By question time this afternoon, the short-lived bipartisanship had once again disappeared, with Peter Dutton trying to use the Greens' position on Gaza to attack the government.
Prime Minister, given the anti-Semitic conduct of the Greens political party and the Prime Minister's justified condemnation of them yesterday, will the Prime Minister rule out governing with the support of the Greens?
I'm reminded of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and what the meaning of life is. In this case, the meaning of life is 78, which is how many members that we have over this side. We seek majority government. The only coalition party in this here is the Liberal Party with the National Party.
The eruption of the debate about social cohesion and the descent into more aggressive parliamentary language ends a fortnight which started with the government under pressure over the release of convicted criminals from immigration detention. But that surefire attack on the government came to a halt when the government started to roll out details of similar cases dealt with while Peter Dutton was minister.
The Albanese Labor government's watering down of the law has allowed this criminal to stay in Australia, making our country less safe.
2 men convicted of accessory to murder were released from federal detention when opposition leader Peter Dutton was the minister in charge of immigration and home affairs.
But by yesterday, the opposition leader was facing questions of his own after a scathing judgment in the Victorian Supreme Court in a matter involving the convicted terrorist Abdul Nasser Ben Brika. Justice Elizabeth Hollingworth said on Wednesday she had concerns there had been, quote, a serious interference with the administration of justice, and she was referring the matter of the then Home Affairs Minister's conduct and some of the agencies involved to the Independent National Security Legislation Monitor. Parliament returns later this month for 2 final weeks before the winter break. The issues that dominated discussion before the sitting just ended, notably housing and domestic violence, remain issues, just not issues that got much of an airing when our national leaders met. With the Senate returning to normal work instead of estimates, we may also see more focus on the primary job of the Parliament, considering and passing legislation.